What's up, fellow polymaths? In this video of the Java Fundamentals tutorial, we'll be going over serialization. Serialization is when an object can be represented as a sequence of bytes that includes the object's data as well as other data about the object type and the types of data stored in the object. After a serialized object has been written into a file, it can be read from the file and deserialized. Deserialization is the reverse of serialization, which is when the type of information and bytes that represent the object and its data can be used to recreate the object. Serialization is mainly used in technologies that utilize object and database writing and reading. The serialization and deserialization process is platform independent, so the process works regardless of what platform you're using. For serializing the object, you can call the writeObject method of the object output stream class, and for deserializing the object, you can call the readObject of the object input stream class. The serializable interface has to be implemented by a class to serialize the object. For a class to be serialized, two conditions must be met. The class must implement the serializable interface, and all the fields in the class must be serializable. If a field is not serializable, it must be marked as transient. The serializable interface must be implemented by the class whose object needs to be persisted, which is data that does not erase. The string class and all the wrapper classes, such as integer, double, and so on, implement the serializable interface by default. So continuing more on serialization, if a class implements the serializable interface, then all its child classes will also be serializable. If a class references another class, then all references must be serializable. Otherwise, the serialization process will not be performed, resulting in an exception. If there are any static variables in the class, then those variables will not be serialized, because the static is a part of the class and not the object. If you don't want to serialize certain variables of a class, you can mark the variable as transient by using the transient keyword next to the variable. The transient keyword can be used with the variables of the class in order to avoid the serialization. So an example is when a program accepts a user's login credentials, but you don't want to store the original password in the file. You can use the transient keyword, and when the Java virtual machine reads the transient keyword, the Java virtual machine ignores the original value of the object and then instead stores the default value of the object. When you deserialize an object using the transient variable will go back to its default value. So for objects, the default value is null, and numbers it's 0, and boolean is false. So now that we have some knowledge about serialization, let's go into the code and try it out. Okay, so we're in the main class right now, and what we're going to do is create a new class that will implement the serializable interface. Alright, so I created this class called hero. We're going to make it pretty basic, so what we're going to do is set some variables that have a name, an ID, and a location, as well as implementing the serializable interface. And here we implemented the serializable interface as well as imported that interface. And the compiler right now is telling us that it does not declare a static final version of the serial version UID field. So basically the serial version UID is a way to verify the sender and the receiver of the same object, making sure that they're the same. So the sender and the receiver must have the same serial version UID. Otherwise an exception is thrown if you try to deserialize that object. So let's add a default serial version UID to this. Alright, so now that we've done that, I'm going to create 4 variables. One's an ID, one's a name, one's an age, and one's a location. Alright, so now that I've created the variables, I'm going to create a constructor as well as some getters and setters based on those variables. Alright, so we were able to generate our getters and setters as well as create the constructor. Now that we've done this, we can go into the main class and call the hero object. Alright, so I'm in the main class right now, and what I'm going to do is call the hero object, filling in the arguments for the constructor. And then we'll be creating a file output stream that will write to a file. Just a quick note, in the hero class, before I put the name variable as an integer, but it's supposed to be a string, so that was a very bad oversight. So just make sure you make that correction. Again, my bad. Alright, so here, back in the main class, we're just going to fill out this constructor that we have for this hero object. Alright, so now that we filled out the constructor for that hero object, we're going to create the output stream to be able to write a file. Alright, so now we've created the code. I'm going to run this and then I'll explain what's happening. Alright, so we got our result. Hero object has been written to the file, no exceptions. So as we see here, the file serialization output text file was created. So now that we've done that, let's deserialize this file. Alright, so I created the code for deserializing the object for the file that we created for the file serialization output. I was explaining what's going on for what happened with the serialization as well as the deserialization. So let's run this right now and see what happens. Alright, so we get our result. We have our ID of 1, the name Superman, age 30, and location of Metropolis. So we were able to serialize as well as deserialize the object. So I'll mention what's going on in this process. Alright, so first what we did is create a hero object, and That hero object contained a constructor with arguments for basically Superman. And then we created a file output stream object and then passed in a text file called file serialization output. And then we also called it an object output stream object. And we passed in that file output object into the object output stream constructor. Then after that, we called the right object, which passes in that hero object. And the right object will take in any object, any type of object. So in this case, the hero object. And the hero object contained the data of the ID, the name, the age, as well as the location that we passed in that hero constructor. After that, we call the flush method, and then we close that object to free up resources. And then we just output that the hero has been written to the file. And this is all in the try catch because try catch is required when dealing with input and output. So then after the file was created, we deserialize the object, uncomment the input and comment out the output. All right, so after that, we deserialize the object by calling the object input stream object. And then in that object input stream constructor, we're calling that file input stream constructor and getting that file that we created which is the file serialization output. After that, we create a hero object called hero de-serialize, and we cast that object input object that we created from the object input stream, and we cast the hero class to that object input, and we call that read object. So basically what it's doing is it's going to be reading the contents from that file that we created. So now the hero de-serialize object contains the contents of that file, which is the name, the ID, the name, the age, and the location. So here we have some print line statements that are basically just using getters, call that data, and after that we close the object to free up resources. That's pretty much it in terms of serialization and deserialization. There's a bit more information when it comes to that, but you pretty much got the fundamentals as far as being able to serialize objects as well as deserializing objects. And again, if you don't want to serialize a certain variable, you can call the transient keyword. All right, here's our assignment for this topic. Number 1, explain the process of serialization and deserialization. Number 2, what is the benefit of utilizing serialization? Number 3, what is the purpose of the transient keyword? If this video was of any value to you, then please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.